Hello, everyone. So, good morning. I just wanted to say before we start with the presentation, questions can be asked without the Slido app afterwards. So, for some of you who don't have a smartphone, feel free to just put up your hand afterwards. Good morning, and it's nice to see all of you here. I'm glad not everyone got too drunk on the boat party last night. And in a couple of seconds, you're going to see two words appear on the screen that kind of might surprise you, but I'm not going to say anything else. Okay, excellent, excellent. I'm glad to see the response that I saw. Anyway, so let's start with the presentation. So the words you and I use determines the way that we think. And essentially, the way that we think determines the way that we act. So who has ever heard of this statement? Awesome, nice. Okay, also excuse my voice, I've had a cold for the whole week, so if it's a little bit croaky, you'll know why. So to anyone who has ever studied linguistics, you might be aware of the Sapir-Whorf-Chomsky kind of ongoing debate, but this is not what I'm going to talk about in my presentation today. What I want to do today is take it on a bit more of a personal level, and I want to get inside of your head. Or more specifically, I want you yourselves to get inside of your own heads. Because essentially there is so little that we know about ourselves and the way that we think and the way that what we think and how we think affects essentially the quality of our lives. And so I hope kind of at the end of this presentation that you get a little bit closer to yourselves and kind of contemplate a little bit more about the words that you're using and how it's affecting all of the goals that you wish to achieve in your life and just essentially everything in your life the way that it is. So the reason why you saw these two random words appear on the screen before, banana and vomit, I actually want to hear about your reactions because there are a lot of you. How did you react? Were you confused? Were you kind of grossed out? Did you have a visual image of someone throwing up bananas? Anyone? Is that what came to mind? Okay, awesome. Not awesome, I don't want you thinking about that. But essentially, those were two completely unrelated words. I mean, they were both on the screen, completely separate from each other, yet, they weren't in a phrase, they weren't in a sentence. We weren't talking about a story about anyone vomiting bananas. I promise I'll stop talking about vomit in a second. But judging by your reaction from the people that I saw here at the front, I can tell you that in those few seconds after you saw those two words, a number of things happened with your physiology. So your heart rate might have increased a little bit, your body hair may have risen a little, and you were having all these images about vomit, and it's probably going to mean that for the next 2 or 3 days, you're not going to want to eat anything to do with bananas at all. So if you think about it, there was actually no reason for you to react that way at all. Because as I said, those words were completely unrelated. We weren't talking about any story, or they weren't in a sentence. There were no verbs or, adjectives or anything. So why was there such an automatic response from you? Does anyone know why? Good, because otherwise my presentation would probably go to waste. So essentially, in your brains, we have two systems. So there's system 1 and system 2. And system 1 is essentially the one whenever, it's like your unconscious mind. So it's whenever you do when you have automatic reactions to things. It's when you walk in through that door and you don't need to think about, okay, how many centimeters is to the left, how many centimeters is to the right. You just kind of know how much space there is. So 2 plus 2 is 4, of course. It's when you're driving a car on an empty road and you've driven down that road thousands of times. You don't really think about which way to steer because you're so used to it. And it was also the system that was used in the response you just had when you saw the words banana and vomit. You didn't need to think, "Ooh, how should I react to this?" It just happened. So that's system 1 for you. And also system 1 is the one that is kind of intact when we think about stereotypes. So whenever your brain tends to, want to categorize something, that's system 1 in action. And system 2 is all about conscious effort. So it's a lot more effortful, tedious. It's for when you need to use your rationale and logic to solve complex problems. So compared to 2 plus 2, if I tell you, okay, you've got to solve 17 times 24 now, you're probably going to need to stop everything that you're doing and kind of focus on it. It's the moment that you brace yourself before a sprinting gun goes off. It's if I tell you, can you please direct your attention to the girl with the pink bow in her hair? And it's that moment when, does everyone know that moment when you're walking down the street and it's a crowded footpath and someone is like, if you're a little bit claustrophobic, someone is right next to you and you're like, okay, if I walk a bit slower, it's going to be weird. So I need to need to sustain that high speed, but it's so unnatural that you feel like, do I even know how to walk anymore? And it's where system 2 comes in, surprisingly, because you would think, oh, walking is so natural to me. I mean, I've been doing it since a baby for most of us, but that's not natural. So it's when you have to sustain that higher walking rate. So you're probably wondering, well, that's great, Lina. What do these systems actually have to do with language? And the banana and vomit example was essentially just to show you how 2 seemingly random words can have such repercussions on our physical and emotional state. And I can guarantee you that if I had shown 2 completely separate words, let's say something to do with money or something to do with peace, your physiology would have shown a different response. And essentially also, we always need a bit of science to back up what we're saying, hence why that example was there. So essentially, words don't have any meaning until we give them meaning. And that meaning comes through experience. And what's so fascinating to me, and one of the reasons why I personally love language, is just the immense power that words have. I mean, they can make us laugh, and can make us cry. And they can heal us, or they can hurt us. And I want you to take a moment now to think back to the last thing that someone said to you that truly made you happy. It could have been a phrase, it could have been a love letter, whatever it was. What was the last thing someone said to you that made you happy? So does anyone want to share? Okay, no, fine. And I mean, it's a personal thing, so it's fine. But now I want you to take a moment and think about one of the most painful things that you've ever heard. So it might have been an insult from someone. It could have been a rejection. It could have been a heartbreak. And if you think about it, and I'm going to say this over and over, but I think it's just so fascinating. Whatever was said was literally just a combination of random letters put together into words to create a phrase, and because of the connection that you had over time built to the meaning of these words, it, either completely made you elated or it shattered you on the inside. And that combination of words and the phrasing was like a lock and a key to your emotional state. And so it triggered a certain response from you. And so I think I want to stress to you that words really are the driving force between everything that we do. And they are what allow us to achieve our goals. They are what allow us, of course, to communicate with everyone, but they help us get through life. And of course, images and body language plays a massive role. But there's a reason why, for example, when we watch motivational videos, that there are words. It's not just the music that you listen to, which is also uplifting, but it's the words that are said to motivate you. And for example, why when we need help, we go and talk to a friend, or we go and talk to a psychologist, or, things like that. So where it all starts from is with the words that go on inside our own heads, so our own self-talk. And if words have the power to make us laugh and to make us cry and, for us to feel angry or anxious, then why don't we give ourselves the power to be in control of when and how exactly we feel those various sensations? So I think now is a bit of a time for me to get into a story. Now, I love stories. And I've kind of run a few of my own experiments over the last year and a half since I kind of discovered, NLP and like this kind of whole idea about, okay, what actually will happen to my life if I change my self-talk. So I want to first ask you all, if someone said to you, you are radical, how would you interpret this? What would you say? Positive. Okay. Who else? Awesome. Anyone else? Yes. Okay, good. You're all correct. Or there's no real correct answer because it's your interpretation. But that's really interesting because the meaning that radical has, well, there are 3 dictionary meanings, but there are kind of 2 main ones. So I'm going to tell you a story. So my boyfriend is from England, so he's British. He speaks English as his native language. And my native language, as much as, the debate of what is your native language, is also English because I grew up in Australia. And so what I find fascinating about language is when 2 native speakers of a language have a complete miscommunication because of one word, or just because the way that they learned a word or the attachment and the context that they have to a word is completely different. So this was the other day, and I think we were talking about our strengths and weaknesses, and I was giving him some advice about a work problem, and he said to me, Lina, I love how radical you are. And to be honest, my first response was a bit of a defensive one, because to me, radical, the first kind of meaning that radical has, is more of a negative one. It has a negative connotation. And that's all to do with the context that I kind of learned the word in. So I studied law in Australia, and I would see the word radical in contexts such as politics, like the radical leftist party, the radical right. A radical approach was always an extreme approach. And so when my boyfriend said to me, Lina, I love how radical you are, I was like, okay, well, I love is a great, great word. But what do you mean by radical? So before I, this was kind of our message. I hope he doesn't mind me taking WhatsApp screenshots here. But I said to him before I got defensive and into my argumentative state, I said, okay, what do you mean by radical? And so in his voice note, he explained, well, radical is also rad, like fantastic, you are extreme, but you are so extreme in your conviction and you take everything within your stride. And I thought, you know what, Will, I'm glad I asked for clarification. So that's one story. And another story, before we get to another story, I thought I'd just show you the power of words. I don't know what you guys are thinking, because the toaster is hot, it emits heat, and the toast is kind of like, that's hot. Anyway, so another story. I don't know why this is about boyfriends, but anyway. My ex-boyfriend was German, and so, so I also live in Germany, so just to kind of put out a fact there. But so my ex-boyfriend was German, and we just spoke German. So for about 2 years of my life, I barely used English, which is kind of funny. And anyway, so being a non-native speaker of German, so I had to learn it, I went through the whole university process, etc. It was a really interesting thing when we would have arguments, because I think I falsely learned the meaning of a couple of words. And essentially, has anyone heard of Tony Robbins before? Okay, cool. So Tony Robbins is, well, in my eyes, he's a fantastic man, business mentor. He's a motivational speaker, and I read one of his books that my ex-boyfriend gave to me, and what was interesting was this book was in German, and so I'd love to read the English version actually, but he talked about in this book about kind of swapping some of the words that you use, because we, as I said before, we have tended to attach a certain meaning to specific words. And so one of these words was aufgeregt, which in German means, it has two meanings, which in German means kind of like, it can be nervous and excited, you know, Ed positively pumped or negatively nervous. And also, German has 21 different words for the word angry. And this is not including, you know, pissed off or annoyed or, you know, slightly rattled or whatever other words, literally just for the synonym to angry. And so, of course, I was like, well, are there different levels of angry? And so when my ex and I had arguments, I would always say, like, ich bin richtig sauer, which is kind of like, I'm sour and angry. To me, it's angry. But he said, you know, Lina, sauer is actually not that bad. It's kind of like, I'm a bit annoyed. And so I was like, okay, do you know what? I need to go and find, like, another meaning. So I came up with Wutentbrand. And I'm like, do you know what, Roman? I am so Wutentbrand. And he's like, you don't look like you're burning with rage. And this was so fascinating because, like, and I actually realized I kind of changed it to English and see, okay, how would this affect me in English? And I can honestly tell you that as soon as I started changing the words that I use to describe feelings, also my kind of emotional state was a lot calmer. So instead of, for example, saying that I'm annoyed or I'm angry or I'm pissed off, I kind of say, do you know what, this is bothering me a bit. And even adding that little a bit helps me like remain calm to tackle the problem. And another thing, well, that I have an issue with is the word problem. And to be honest, I think I haven't used the word except for in this talk now to describe when I have problems. I see them as challenges. And that gives you kind of, as soon as you swap your mindset and instead of saying, oh, I had to deal with this problem today at work, or my partner and I are having problems, say we're going through a challenge. Because every human essentially likes challenges. We like to face a challenge, even though it's uncomfortable. And as soon as you change that word in your vocabulary and you don't say problem and you see it as a challenge, I can guarantee you that something within you is going to change and you're going to see life quite differently. So, why does all of this matter? Essentially, what this all has to do with is NLP. And I am quite sure that a lot of you have heard of NLP, but it's Neurolinguistic Programming. And so the neuro is, of course, the neurology, so everything that is inside your brain. And linguistics, of course, we all know, is the language. And programming is how that kind of neural language functions in our brain and in our body. And essentially, how many of us have been to a country? And this happened to me the other day, actually, here around the corner. How many of you have been to a country and have ordered something and you haven't received what you have actually what you thought you ordered? Can you put your hands up? Okay, cool, awesome, I'm not the only one. So essentially, even if you're like scrambling through your Lonely Planet guide trying to find the right word, you might have attached the wrong meaning to a word and things happen. So if you ever go to Italy and you want to order a latte, so in Australia and I think in Germany and in a lot of other places, you would know latte is like a milky coffee. But in Italy, you're going to be looked at really strangely and people are going to be like, paesano, like who is this? Who wants a milk with their food? Because latte means just milk. And the same thing happened to me actually on Wednesday when we arrived here. My friend and I went to get a burger, and I looked quickly on my phone, okay, how do you say thank you in Slovak? And I saw, okay, thank you, you're welcome, blah, blah, blah. And so the girl came in and she gave me my food and my drink, and I said, prosim. Then I realized, and she looked at me really strangely for a moment, and I was like, oh shit, I think that wasn't the right word. And I had just said you're welcome to her when she gave me my food. So there's a little personal experience. But essentially, to do with NLP, there's a very famous expression, and it says that the conscious mind is the goal-getter. And the unconscious, sorry, wrong one, is the goal setter. So we consciously set a goal when we're thinking about it, like, okay, what are my goals for the next, year or 5 years? That's your conscious mind. And it's actually your unconscious mind that determines whether you're going to get, whether you're even going to achieve that goal or not. So your unconscious mind is the goal getter. And even in our own native languages, it's a dangerous path to live with an impoverished vocabulary. I mean, if you think about it, in the English language, I think there is something like 500,000 words, and the average person uses anywhere between 2,000 and 1,000 per day. So if you think about it, my maths is not the greatest, but I think it's roughly like 0.5% of the English language that you're actually using. And I think that that really has an impact on how we see the world and how, great our experiences are. So there are repercussions when we become lazy with our vocabulary, because I think that an impoverished vocabulary does lead to an impoverished life. So a couple of years ago, I went to Cinque Terre, amazing place. Has anyone ever been? Awesome. Okay. So Cinque Terre, like looking at this picture, you might often, like, if you come back from a holiday, and your friends ask you, your co-workers ask you, your family asks you, how was your holiday? The number of people that I know that just respond with, it was good. Like, what is good? Not bad. I'm like, okay. Well, like, how poor of a vocabulary is that? Because it's like you live in a polarized kind of world. It's like, it's okay, it's either good or it's bad, and something in the middle is just not bad, and if it's a bit more bad, then it's not good. So how would you describe this photo? Wonderful, amazing, okay. How would you describe the scenery? Like, what adjectives come to mind? I know I'm putting you under pressure now. Sorry? Picturesque, yes, beautiful word. Colorful, lovely. I'm glad no one said, it's really nice, or it's really good. And so, yeah, it's kind of like what happens when I tell my mind that something is just good or just bad or it's not bad, blah, blah, blah. If someone tells you, that their holiday was not bad, it generally leaves the impression, without them saying anything else, of, oh, well, something happened on their holiday. Like, it wasn't, if it was just not bad, something obviously happened. And essentially, the choice of language, as you will see here by George Lakoff, is vital, but it's vital because it evokes certain frames, moral and conceptual frames. So in a second, I'm going to talk to you about positive and negative framing. And I want you to, before I get into it, go ahead right now and think about a goal or a habit that you've been trying to build, or a habit that you're maybe trying to break. So if there was one thing you could change right now within your habits, what would it be? So I don't want you to tell me, I want you to think about it. And I'm going to go into another personal story in a second. But essentially, NLP, you will know now, is about not only communication, within yourself, but it's also then how that affects others. And I'm not a neuropsychologist or anything, so don't ask me about the ins and outs of NLP. But I do believe, that the way that we frame certain sentences, not only, now adjectives that we use to describe things in our lives, but whether we form them in a positive or in a negative way, really has an impact on the way that, the next choice that we make or the next actions that we take. And there was a study done where people were put in an MRI scanner, and the word no was shown, like, in some way to them. And what happened was that within a split second, there were dozens and dozens of stress-producing hormones that were released. And the neurotransmitters in their brains were kind of interrupted, and it impaired the normal functioning of their brain. And so there were various tests done on this, and it's really interesting because when I was reading this study and I came to think about it, I was like, do you know what, actually, like, whenever you hear a negative comment, or let's say something is stressing you out, we all know this feeling, I'm sure of it. When we are stressed out or we are anxious about, an upcoming event or an upcoming test that we need to write or a difficult conversation that we need to have, and let's say it's at the end of the day and you're sitting there at work or doing whatever you're doing, and you just can't focus because your brain is just scrambling through, what if this happens? Oh my God, am I good enough? And there are all these, words going through your head that are impacting your concentration. And when they're negative, you can basically just close your laptop and forget about doing anything because nothing is going to happen. And that's one example as to how, I already said that, anyway, as to how powerful words are. And so I want you to take this away. If there's one thing that you take away from this talk, is just that negative words or phrases, they don't just affect, your mind or your state. They affect every other choice you are going to make on that day, in that hour, and it's going to affect the people around you. And positive words and positive framing has the very opposite effect. It reduces stress. And time for... Sorry?
Most people native speakers?
With this one? Yeah. So I want to give you another example from my life. As I said, I put kind of this theory to test. And this is a really personal story, but I think, it will allow us to get closer to each other. So I had an eating disorder from the age of about 12 to 19. And there was a stage about when I was 15 where I remember sitting in my room, and it was kind of just like, it had nothing to do with my body image anymore. I started kind of dieting, and I literally think I've tried every single diet in the world. And I remember just sitting in my room, and I had a panic attack because there were so many words running through my head and phrases, and I had talked myself into, and this was when I was 15, so 3 years of me telling myself that, I had to be super, super skinny to have any value. Or, my best friends and people around me were all super skinny, and I felt like that's what I needed to be able to be confident. And I was a super shy kid, and super shy at high school, and it affected me a lot. And so what I started to do, and this went on until I was 19, and when I was 19 was when I met my ex, actually, who gave me this Tony Robbins book, who gave me the power to reframe the way that I was thinking about myself and about my life in my head. And so what I did was I sat down, and it was almost like programming. So it's like when you sit down and, you're in a classroom learning a language, and you're writing out, okay, this is the rule for the pluperfect, or this is the rule for the subjunctive. I was rewriting the rules that I was dictating my life by. And so I thought, okay, why is it that I am not able to kind of think healthily about myself? Or kind of why is it that I feel the need to have to go on a diet and then binge eat and then I go on another diet? And I just wrote down all of the thoughts that came to mind, and I realized, wow, okay, so you've been sabotaging your own self. It was no one else who had ever told me, you are too fat, or you are this, or you are that. It was just me. And so I kind of wrote down, and what helped me was, I'm not going to go into too much detail, otherwise we'll be here for 3 hours, but one of the key things I remember that kind of just was an automatic switch in my head was I wrote down, why do I think what I think? Instead of just writing, first step was I wrote down everything that I was thinking, and I thought, okay, well, where does this come from? And I realized that it was like I had programmed myself throughout the years to think certain things because I myself had attached a reasoning to them. I need to weigh 50 kilos to be confident and to be able to speak in front of people and live my life. And it was just nonsense. And so I guess what I want to say to you, and, to change your own lives, the first step was to catch yourself in the act. So this is not just to do with, the negative beliefs or negative framing, but it's about Also, the adjectives thing. Like whenever you notice yourself relying on certain words in your vocabulary, which I also found, like if you're an intermediate speaker of any language, we have this tendency as well. Like you're so comfortable and you've reached this like, B1, B2 level, whatever they are, that we get really comfortable with phrases, and we know that, to get to the next level, you need to learn more vocabulary and use adjectives. Instead of good and bad and nice, you use like beautiful, eloquent, things like that. So catch yourself in the act and play down your negativity. So even changing words like I need, and this is a big one. Have you ever woken up in the morning and you're like, oh, today I need to do this. I need to go and do this. I need to edit this video. I need to write this email. Instead of saying like, I need, say, wow, I get to do this today. Like just kind of switching your perspective and realizing I get to talk to these people today. I get to improve myself. I get to face a challenge, no matter how, none of us likes writing emails, but we do it because we know, okay, this is a part of the whole process that I'm in. And, enrich your vocabulary. Seek out a different framing, which was the I need to, the I get to, and turn up your positivity. So I sound like a motivational guru right now, but it really works. And some of the 3 key words to change, as I said, I need, enough. You say, oh, is this good enough? Am I good enough? That's enough. Like, instead of saying, am I good enough? Just be like, do you know what? I'm improving. I may not be the best. That's a bit of negative framing, but, kind of, don't, how do I put it? Like, if you're really, really bad at something, don't obviously say, I'm the best at this, woo! But, be a little bit kinder to yourself, because it's going to have an effect on the people around you. And if you're not kind to yourself, you're unconsciously going to start to not be kind to other people. And it's also going to have an impoverishing effect on your life. And the last one, as I mentioned, was problem. Problem, forget about problem. After today, if you have a problem, I want you to see it as a challenge. So, yeah, that was my presentation. Thank you very much, guys. Also, I was told to do a little bit of self-promotion, so I'm Lina Vasquez. I have a YouTube channel called The Busy Linguist, and with Ed, who is sitting at the back there, we also have a German learning channel called Double Deutsch, so you can find me on there. Yeah. Anyway, questions. So questions can be asked. Yeah, I think we said.
There are questions here, so.
Okay. Yeah.
You hear me? Okay. Is it okay if I ask Linus, or would you like to read? Yeah. Okay, we'll just do it. So, does it matter in which language we program our brain? Is foreign language better than mother tongue? Oh, okay, John.
That is a really good question. Okay, so someone asked, does it matter in which language we program our brain? Is foreign better than mother tongue? Well, I don't think that's the right question in that sense. Like, what's better or worse? I don't like to see things as this is better than that thing. As the examples that I gave you, one was a kind of an English example and one was a German example. And German, for me, I learned to a native speaker level. So, to be honest, I think it doesn't have to be your first language or your native language. If it's a language that you're comfortable in and you live in that language and you're using that language, then obviously that's the relevant language for you. Does that make sense? Cool.
Okay. How would you define cultural intelligence?
Whoever asked that question, do you want to maybe be more, I guess, elaborate on your question? Yes. How do you define cultural intelligence?
I think it's important to recognize the fact that the person is using certain vocabulary in a non-native language. It does not express his impoverished state of intelligence, but maybe he is not up to the level of native speaker. So I think it's the empathy that matters for native speaker to accept that.
Okay, well then that has more to do with the native speaker than the person using it. And I think anyone, like, I know this from myself, and it was something that gave me like a push to improve my Portuguese, was when I was in a situation, and, you know, obviously you might have been able to tell I like to talk a lot. And I couldn't talk because I didn't have the vocabulary. But I think also that's where we as language learners have a lot more empathy for other people. And I'm also a language teacher, so I know that from when my students say certain things, I know why they say what they say. And I know that it's not to do with their intelligence, because you have different types of intelligence. You know, as you said, cultural intelligence. You also have emotional intelligence. You have people who are gifted in, you know, music. You have people who are gifted like streetwise, in the sense of they are really good with, you know, like street intelligence, if you can call it that. So I think it's also defining intelligence is also one of those slippery slopes. But I think, yeah, that has more to do with the native speaker that can't show empathy than the person trying, because that person just doesn't have the, you know, they haven't learned the words yet. Doesn't mean they won't, but once they do, bam, the world is theirs.
Okay, could you go back to the 5 action steps slide, because people take down
This one.
Yeah, I think that's it. Okay. Yeah, so maybe this one. What are your favorite examples for reframing for language learning?
Ooh, my favorite examples. Okay, my favorite examples for reframing when learning a language. Whoever asked the question, do you mean like when I learn a new language, or when I already am like in the process of learning a language and kind of want to be more positive in that language, or what do you mean exactly? Okay, cool. So I think one of my favorite examples was to do with German, because German was always kind of the language that I was most passionate about. And I realized, like, living in Germany as well, the more adjectives that I could kind of use, and when I would think about my experiences, as I said in my speech, I noticed, I caught myself out when I was using the same words over and over to describe experiences. So, you know, you also fall into the trap, like I live in Berlin, and you fall into the trap of using Denglish. So I have to say, like, you know, if I don't know a word in German, or it doesn't come to me and an English word comes to me, that's fine, because it's Berlin and people speak Denglish, which is like a mixture of German and English. So I think I started reading more books, just books that I was interested in German, where I got vocabulary from, and then I applied them into my life, and I realized that when I started to talk to people about my experiences, you know, let's say about, I don't know, going to the gym or whatever I do in my life, I realized that I also felt differently when I started to say things like, do you know what? I had like an awesome training, even though my training wasn't like the best that day. Or, you know, I'm proud of this. I guess talking yourself up in whichever language it is, or using more positive framing, tends to just, yeah, it's essentially comes back to you. And so you're going to be in a positive state, whether you're saying that in Spanish or French or Thai or Indonesian, that's going to be the effect on it. I feel like I just went on a tangent, but anyway.
Okay, and this one, how do you think we can use this to destroy stereotypical gender roles, say in kindergarten?
Ooh. How we can use what exactly? I feel like I need clarification for these questions. Who asked the question?
7 people.
7 people? What do you mean? Okay, that makes sense. That is a really good question. So how we can use framing, or what specifically? I feel like I need more information to be able to answer that question.
I would guess framing. So how would you teach kids to use this NLP? Or can it be taught at an early age?
gender pronoun that is not female nor male, for example, is a way against gender issues.
Yes. Yes, I would suggest, for example, that we stop calling the little girls beautiful and the little boys brave or funny. It's just that we use other types of adjectives that are not sort of gender-related.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that. I think, come to think of it, I think a lot of us would be used to, classic examples of, as you just said, girls are, weak and soft and this and that, and guys are strong and brave and blah, blah, blah. And I think that if we kind of just add a bit more fluidity in the usage of words, because, as I said, the more that we attach certain context to a word or a meaning, then the more we're going to kind of categorize them. As I just said, boys are this, girls are that. And I think that's a silly way to think about it, because people are people. We all grow up differently. You have women that are strong and brave. You have men that are also that. So it doesn't really matter if you're a guy or a girl when it comes to those things. I think it's more about how are you as a character. Like, look at your persona rather than, oh, this adjective is related to this gender and that adjective is related to that gender, so I have to be like that. Yes?
All this action involves to be like an injunction to be positive and to be kind of confident of what positivity is. And the question I wonder is, am I right in this way toward this person? I mean, it's not only us, we have to deal with some stupid people every day. At least neutralize them in order not to be aggressive and not to let them allow to be, but still we are losing time and we're wasting energy with those people. We can help it. Those people are in real life. But then I was thinking the other day, let's say you're at work and you feel full of positivity, you want to talk to your colleague in front of the coffee machine. Turns out to happen that months after you realize that maybe this person is an artist and he needs really space, and it is really an aggression for him to go through socialization out of the group. So how can you keep the balance and adjust your way of engaging the other people without really knowing what's inside their mind?
Communication, ask them. I think people don't understand sometimes the power that a question has, and this is where misunderstandings come from, because, and two things I want to say to your point, really, really good point. The first one, whatever goes inside you has nothing to do with anyone else, and it's that classic example of, a ship or a boat cannot be synced unless you let the water in. So it's kind of like, it doesn't matter if someone else is aggressive or negative or whatever, it's you only have control over yourself. And if you let someone else's negativity affect you, then that's on you. That's your fault. And it's the same thing otherwise. You cannot know what is going on in every single person's head. Just like I don't know what you're all thinking about, but if I wanted to know, or if I had if I kind of see or I sense, okay, someone is giving me like bad vibes, or they look like they're down, they look like they're stressed, just ask. And if, let's just say, it might not also work out that they tell you straight away, but that's fine, because you've essentially done everything in your power that you could have. And if they don't want to tell you, that's on them, like that's to do with them. It has nothing to do with you. And the same thing, let's say if this person doesn't like to socialize, then maybe try socializing with someone else, or ask them at a later point, because we all know, like in those moments when we're stressed out and someone asks us a question and we reply, maybe we just blurt something out, and then later we go up to them and we say, oh, do you know what, actually I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to say it that way, I was just really stressed out. That happens. So I think just to be mindful of timing and just ask questions. Yeah. Okay.
One little question.
Yes.
It's only a comment. You maybe notice that we people in Germany are very angry because we have friendly one that's for being angry and
I don't know. Okay. I don't like to stereotype. I think Germans are lovely. I think there are characteristics that a lot of people have that you see more in a specific country than in another country. But I think people are different. Anyway, thank you very much, guys.